The conflict between Russia and Ukraine has been grabbing headlines all over the world for the last few months, and rightfully so, with it being one of the most large-scale wars that has been fought since the days of World War II. However, with everyone's attention being on Ukraine, another conflict, slightly smaller in terms of size, has been going on unnoticed deep in Central Asia, hidden amongst the Himalayas and out of sight of the public eye and far from our imaginations. Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan have been entangled in a series of conflicts for many years. But why are they at war? And what are they fighting over? And why are the USA, China, and Russia all interested in the region and this conflict? Well, we'll answer all those questions and more in this video. Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan are located in Central Asia, which is a region that stretches from the Caspian Sea in the west to the edges of western China and Mongolia in the east, from Afghanistan and Iran to the south, to Russia in the north. Within this region lie 5 countries: Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan, which are referred to locally as the stans, as the suffix stan means land of in Persian. The peoples of these lands are very diverse. Many are settlers from the more powerful neighboring countries. When the Soviet Union was in power, all of Central Asia came under its rule. Due to this, many of the people living there today are Russian and Ukrainian. Looking back even further, when the Chinese Empire was a dominant force, Central Asia was closely tied to the Silk Road trade routes, which led to many Chinese people settling in the area. The Mongols, too, at the height of their power, annexed this region as their own. In the Islamic era, the Iranian people moved into this area as well. Due to all this turnover over the centuries, the demographic makeup of the population of Central Asia today contains traces of all these cultures and peoples, making it a melting pot of the past in the present. These countries all have a wealth of natural resources, which continue to make them attractive to stronger nations. Kazakhstan and Turkmenistan have abundant reserves of oil and natural gas. Kazakhstan also has the world's largest uranium reserves, an extremely valuable commodity in this modern nuclear age. Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Uzbekistan all have large amounts of gold reserves, as well as other metals like aluminum. However, despite this extreme wealth of natural resources, none of these countries have been able to establish themselves as major players with any real power on the international stage. Now, why is that? Well, for now, keep that in mind, as we'll answer it later on. But before we get into that, let's take a look at the conflict that is currently taking place in the area between the countries of Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan. Over the last 5 years, there have been over 20 clashes at the border between the two nations. These clashes have varied from small-scale conflicts of civilians throwing stones at each other to governmental military forces exchanging fire with heavy equipment. But how did they get there? Historically, the natives of both these lands were farmers who used the lands of the areas to raise livestock, which is often the main source of their livelihood. However, the manner in which the people of both countries did so before the Soviet Union took them over was very different. Kyrgyz farmers were pastoral nomads who used to migrate from place to place with their flocks, depending on the time of year. The Tajik farmers, on the other hand, stayed in one place and raised a small number of animals to support their families all year round. This was also because the grazing lands of the Tajik side of the border are much scarcer as compared to the pastures of plenty on the Kyrgyz side. When the Soviet Union took over, their communist model was implemented, and both sides were forced into this centralized form of farming. Under it, their livestock was redistributed to collective and state farms, which were run by the Soviet government, which these farmers were now forced to work for. After the Soviet Union was dissolved, both sides became independent nations, and the pasture management agreements that were in place under the Soviet Union became invalid. Both countries now had to create new agreements for themselves. It is from here that the conflict arose. Kyrgyzstan established their pasture management laws quite swiftly after gaining independence. The laws prohibit foreign nationals from using these lands for grazing. On the Tajik side, however, no legislation was passed regarding the use of pastures for farming communities. A reason for this was the civil war that took place in the country between 1992 and 1997. The laws regarding pasture usage in Tajikistan are still under development even today. Since the Tajik people living close to the border do not have enough land to graze their livestock, they often move into Kyrgyz territory to do so. But since they are prohibited by Kyrgyz law to make use of these lands, this act is considered illegal by the Kyrgyz people and their government, who take it upon themselves to retaliate. Additionally, these grazing lands are grown scarcer every year as populations on both sides of the border are growing rapidly, meaning there is more demand for these lands. In addition to conflict over lands, there are also conflicts over water resources, as the two countries share a number of channels and rivers that flow from one to the other. Due to this, there are always disputes from both sides that the other is using too much of the water resources and not leaving enough for their neighbors. Climate change is also playing a part in these conflicts, and for the worse. Studies have shown that Central Asia is at risk to the threat of global warming, and it is in fact causing the lands that these communities would use for grazing to decrease every year. Water resources are also becoming scarcer due to the effects of climate change. With these communities already struggling to meet their needs with the available resources, and engaging in conflicts with each other due to the lack of land and water, the fact that the situation could only get worse spells trouble. Climate change could lead to much larger-scale conflicts in the future. Do you remember how at the beginning of the video we told you to keep in mind the fact that despite having a wealth of natural resources, the countries of Central Asia have not been able to lift themselves out of their poverty? The main reason is that the superpowers of the world, mainly the United States of America, Russia, and China, have sought to exploit this region of Central Asia and keep the countries within it in a state of dependence, so that they can use them for their own advantage. Central Asia, based on its geographical position alone, holds a valuable strategic position due to its proximity to several great powers on the Eurasian landmass, such as China and Russia. One can understand why it's valuable to the USA from this alone, as these two nations are its biggest rivals. Russia has already been the main commercial presence in the region of Central Asia for many years, due to the lingering effects of its rule over the area from when it was still the Soviet Union. Due to this, the Russians have had access and have been able to take away a great deal of the rich natural resources present in the area. They have done this under the name of cooperation, as both countries are part of the Collective Security Treaty Organization, also known as CSTO, an intergovernmental military alliance, headed by Russia. Even the recent peace agreement that was signed by both sides after the violence in September was brokered by Russia under the rules of this alliance. China, too, wishes to increase their presence in the area for this very reason, and hope to supplant Russia over time and become the dominant force here. The Shanghai Cooperation Organization, SCO, is a political, economic, and military organization consisting of a number of nations, including Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan. China hopes to strengthen their ties with these nations through this organization, and by doing so, also weaken Russia's influence in the area. Central Asia has become the geopolitical center for this tussle between the USA, Russia, and China. The problem with this is that the countries in the region and the people have not been able to develop due to the repressive influence of these superpowers. It's also the reason these conflicts between Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan have not been widely reported on, as these superpowers would rather keep these countries in a state of conflict and stress, so they cannot develop and break free from under their control. Halford Mackinder, one of the fathers of geopolitics and geostrategy, in his Heartland theory that concerned the geopolitical analysis of the whole world, stated that this region of Central Asia was part of the Great Pivot. By this, he meant that the power that managed to gain control of this region and its wealth of natural resources, as well as its strategic location, would ultimately become the empire of the world. It's no wonder then why all these superpowers want it so badly. And there you have it, folks. We hope you found this video informative and learned something new about the region of Central Asia and the conflict occurring there between Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan. If you enjoyed the video, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on more videos just like this. We are always coming out with content on interesting trending topics like this from around the world. Until then, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.